You are done. Security will escort you out immediately.
You can't fire me for this.
Some people get fired with a letter. Some get a quiet conversation in a small office with the door closed. Evelyn Carter got fired in front of 14 people. Adrien Blackwood stood at the head of the boardroom table the way he always stood, like the room had been built around him specifically, like the air itself had agreed to organize in his favor. His suit was dark. His face was darker. You leaked confidential files to a competitor, he said. Not a question. A verdict. Evelyn stood at the opposite end of the table. She was 29 years old, for months pregnant, and the only person in that room who was not sitting down. Her hands were flat on the table to keep them from shaking. I didn't, she said. 2 words. That was all she got before Adrien nodded once and security appeared at the door. The 14 people at that table looked at their papers, their phones, the wall, anywhere but at her. Not one of them spoke. She gathered nothing. There was nothing to gather. She walked toward the door with her back straight and her chin level. At the threshold, she stopped. She didn't turn around. One day, she said quietly, "You'll know what you threw away." Then she was gone. The elevator doors closed and Evelyn let herself breathe. Just breathe. In and out. The kind of breathing that isn't really about air. It's about holding yourself together when everything wants to come apart. Blackwood Tower had 43 floors. She had worked on the 38th for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She had learned the building the way you learn something you plan to stay in, where the light came through the east windows in the morning, which elevator ran slow, which conference rooms were cold enough to need a cardigan even in July. She knew this building better than she knew most people. She stepped out into the lobby. The marble floor was pale and wide and her footsteps made no sound on it. The security guard at the front desk looked at her badge, then at his screen, then back at her. "I need the badge, ma'am." She unpinned it, set it on the desk, walked through the glass doors into the afternoon. No savings. The last 3 months of her salary had gone to her mother's medical bills. No one to call. She had spent 2 years making this job her entire life. And somewhere beneath her ribs, a 4-month-old heartbeat that belonged to both of them, though only she knew it. She walked until the tower disappeared behind her. It had been a storm that started it. Not a metaphor. An actual storm, February, the kind that shuts down the city in layers, first the bridges, then the trains, then the streets. Evelyn had stayed late that night because the quarterly reports had an error that would have embarrassed Adrien in the morning, and she had found it and was fixing it. She didn't expect him to still be there. He was in his private office with the lights low and the city dark and wet behind the floor-to-ceiling glass. He wasn't working. He was just sitting. That was the thing that stopped her in the doorway, Adrien Blackwood, sitting still, doing nothing, looking at nothing. She should have left. She knew that even then. Instead, she asked if he wanted coffee. He laughed. Not a polished laugh. A short, tired, real one. "Sit down, Evelyn," he said. "Please." So she sat. And they talked, not about work, not about the company, but about the things that collect in a person when they've spent years being competent and controlled and completely alone. She didn't plan for what happened next. She didn't think he did either. By morning the storm was over and they were both very careful not to speak of it again. She was 4 weeks late before she understood what that night had left her with. Vanessa Hale watched Evelyn leave from the glass wall of her office on the 39th floor. She had a good view from there. She had chosen that office specifically for its view. Vanessa was 34 years old, elegant in the practiced way of someone who had studied elegance the way others study law or medicine. She had been Adrien's fiancée for 8 months. She had been planning to be Adrien's fiancée for much longer than that. She watched Evelyn cross the plaza below, that straight back, those careful steps, and she felt something that was not quite satisfaction. Satisfaction implies surprise. Vanessa was not surprised. She had arranged this. What she felt was confirmation. The quiet, settling feeling of a plan arriving exactly where it was aimed. She turned from the window and picked up her phone. What almost no one knew, and what Adrien certainly didn't know, was that Vanessa had learned about Evelyn's pregnancy 6 weeks ago. A contact at the clinic. A favor called in. A file passed across a table in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. She had known before the bump showed. Before Evelyn had told a single person. She had used that time wisely. The leaked documents. The timestamps. The accusation prepared and ready like something kept sharp in a drawer. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly. Adrien did not sleep that night. He told himself it was the leak. The breach was serious. The files contained 3 years of strategic planning, acquisition targets, proprietary data. He had every reason to be awake, every reason to be furious, every reason to sit at his desk at 2 in the morning working through the damage. But his mind kept returning to Evelyn's face. Not her words. Her face. The way it had stayed still when he delivered the verdict. The way her hands had pressed flat against the table, not in anger, he realized now, but as though the table was the only solid thing in the room. He opened the file again. The evidence Vanessa had presented to the board, emails, access logs, timestamps. He went through them carefully the way he went through everything methodically, without feeling, looking only at what the numbers said. He stopped on the timestamps. The files had been accessed at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday. He scrolled through Evelyn's access records for that week. She had badged out at 6:15 that evening. The building's own system confirmed it. She had not returned. He sat with that for a long time. The leak was real. But the shape of it was wrong. It was too clean. Too placed. Like furniture arranged not for living in but for a photograph. He closed the file. He opened it again. Evelyn made it 4 blocks before her legs stopped cooperating. She sat down on the steps of a building that turned out to be a small community clinic, pale brick, a painted sign, a pot of yellow flowers by the door that someone had remembered to water. She sat there and let the afternoon move around her and tried to think about what came next. She couldn't get past the next hour. An elderly woman came through the clinic door, stopped, and looked at her the way certain people look at someone in trouble, not with pity exactly, but with the specific attentiveness of a person who has learned that looking away costs something. "When did you last eat?" she asked. Evelyn looked up. The woman was perhaps 70, small-framed, with the kind of face that has been weathered into kindness. "This morning," Evelyn said. "And you're pregnant." "For months." The woman sat down beside her on the step. She did not ask for an explanation. She did not offer advice. She simply sat, the way certain people know how to sit, as if they have nowhere more important to be. Her name was Mrs. Rose. By evening, Evelyn was asleep in the spare room of a small apartment 6 blocks away. She had not planned this. But then, the best shelters rarely announce themselves. Mrs. Rose made tea the way people do when they've made it 10,000 times, without measuring, without looking, with the particular confidence of long habit. She set a cup in front of Evelyn and sat across from her and said, "Tell me about the man." Evelyn looked up. "There's always a man," Mrs. Rose said simply. "Or a woman. Or both. But the way you're carrying that weight, it's not just the baby." Evelyn told her. Not everything, not at once. It came out the way truth usually does, slowly, in pieces, with long pauses between. When she said Adrien Blackwood's name, Mrs. Rose went very still. "The Blackwood Company," she said. "You know it?" "I worked for his mother." She was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor Blackwood. A hard woman made harder by a harder life. She raised that boy the way her own father raised her, with silence and expectation, and very little warmth." She turned her teacup slowly. "I always wondered what kind of man he would become." She looked at Evelyn's face. "I suppose now I know a little more." Evelyn said nothing. There was something in the way Mrs. Rose spoke about Adrien, not unkindly, but with the particular sadness of someone who has watched a child grow up in the wrong direction. Like she was still hoping he might turn around. On a Wednesday morning, a man Evelyn did not recognize walked past the clinic 3 times. She noticed him on the second pass. By the third, she had moved away from the window and told Mrs. Rose, who looked out with the calm of someone who has seen enough of the world not to be easily startled. "He's been there since yesterday," Mrs. Rose said. "I didn't want to worry you." Evelyn understood immediately. There was only one person who would want to know where she was. Only one person with reason to watch her. That night she wrote 2 things in the small notebook she kept by the bed. The first was a list of what she would need: money, a new apartment, a plan for after the baby. Practical things. Things she could actually control. The second thing she wrote was a question she didn't fully answer. Does he know? Not the surveillance. Not Vanessa. She meant Adrien. Did he know about the baby? Did any part of him wonder? Did he look at the evidence on his desk and feel, even once, that something was wrong? She closed the notebook. She had spent 2 years watching Adrien Blackwood think. She knew the particular way his face went still when he had found an error. She had seen it dozens of times. She could only hope she was right about what it meant. The envelope arrived at Adrien's private office on a Friday morning with no return address and his name written in plain block letters. His assistant, the new one, who was efficient and interchangeable and nothing like Evelyn, left it on his desk without comment. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A partial medical record. Not a full file, just enough. A patient name. A clinic address. A due date. Adrien read it 3 times. He was not a man who panicked. Panic, in his experience, was simply the body demanding attention before the mind had finished working. He had trained himself to let the mind finish. He sat with the paper and he calculated. The due date. Count backward. Subtract the weeks. Land on a month. February. He sat very still. There was one night in February that had no professional explanation. One night that existed outside of every boundary he had built, that had happened in the particular honesty of a storm and an empty office and 2 people who were both more tired and more real than they ever allowed themselves to be at work. He folded the paper. He had spent 2 weeks convincing himself that the evidence against Evelyn was clean and correct. He now understood that he had been convincing himself of a great many things. He told himself it wasn't possible. Then he told himself that, even if it were possible, it didn't mean what it appeared to mean. Evelyn had access to his schedule. She was smart enough to calculate what a due date would imply. This could be a manipulation, a desperate woman using a biological coincidence to create a claim on his name and his money. He told himself this sitting at his desk. He told himself this driving home. He told himself this at midnight standing at the window of his penthouse looking at the city below. By 2 in the morning, he was no longer thinking about manipulation. He was thinking about February. The way she had listened to him that night, not with the attentive performance of a good assistant, but with the real, quiet attention of a person who was actually present. He had said things that night he had not said to anyone. Not to Vanessa. Not to his board. Not to the men who called themselves his friends. He had said them to Evelyn because she was there, and the storm was loud, and he was so tired of being only one version of himself. By 3 in the morning, certainty was gone. What was left was something harder to manage, the slow, uncomfortable possibility that he had made an enormous mistake. He went to her apartment building on a Saturday morning. The landlord was a heavy-set man who answered the door in a weekend shirt and held it half open the way people do when they've decided they're not coming out. Evelyn Carter, Adrien said. Apartment 4C. The man shook his head. Moved out. When? 3 weeks ago. Maybe 4. He scratched the back of his neck. She came back once for a box she'd left. Looked like she'd been crying for about a week. He paused. You a relative? No. The man looked at him for a moment, at the suit, the car behind him, the careful blankness of a wealthy man's face. She left in a cab, he said. 1 suitcase. She had the look of someone who was trying to disappear somewhere quiet. Adrien thanked him and returned to his car. He sat in it for a while without starting the engine. He had a private investigator on retainer, a man named Soren who found missing heirs and dishonest executives with equal precision. He could have Evelyn's address by morning. He didn't make the call immediately. He needed to be sure, first, of why he was looking. Not what he owed her. Not what the law required. The deeper, harder question, what kind of man was he going to be about this? He didn't have the answer yet. Soren found the clinic in 2 days. Adrien went alone. He told no one, not his new assistant, not his driver. He took a car from the lower garage and drove himself through streets he hadn't driven in years. The clinic was small and pale bricked with yellow flowers by the door. He stood outside it for longer than necessary. The nurse who eventually agreed to speak with him was a woman in her 50s who had clearly dealt with powerful men before and had long since stopped being impressed by them. "I can't share patient information," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for that." "Then what are you asking?" He was quiet for a moment. "I want to know if she was okay. And I want to know," he stopped. Restarted. "She wouldn't have come to me. I know that. I want to understand why." The nurse studied him with the practiced eyes of someone who has learned to read people's actual intentions through what they say and how they pause. "She never planned to ask you for anything," she said finally. "She talked about it once. She said she didn't want her child growing up as a footnote in someone else's story. She let that sit. She wasn't hiding from you to punish you," the nurse added. "She was protecting the baby from the kind of world she believed you would bring." Adrien drove home in silence. Vanessa noticed the change in Adrien the way a careful person notices weather, not by looking directly at it, but by reading the things around it. He stopped mentioning Evelyn. That was the first sign. For weeks after the firing, Adrien had been asking questions about the leak, small, precise questions that circled the subject without landing on it. Then he stopped. Completely. He also canceled 2 dinners with the board, rescheduled a meeting with the legal team, spent 3 evenings at his desk with files she wasn't invited to look at. She escalated. She went to 3 board members individually, men who trusted her because she had given them reasons to, and she told each one a version of the same story. Evelyn Carter was not gone. She was building a case. She had a child on the way that she intended to use as a legal instrument. This was not a personal matter anymore. It was a threat to the company's stability, to the succession structure, to everything they had built. She told Adrien over dinner that the board was concerned, that the right move was a clean, public commitment, a marriage announcement, a united front. "The announcement can be small," she said. "Private. Just the board and the families." Adrien looked at her across the table. He said nothing. He picked up his glass and looked out the window and said nothing for a very long time. Mrs. Rose found the number by accident. Evelyn kept a small notebook on the nightstand, addresses, reminders, the occasional phone number written in the careful handwriting of someone who trusted paper more than phones. Most of it was ordinary. But on the last written page, in faint pencil, almost smudged out, "AB, private. Do not use." She had not used it. Evelyn had not used it. In 6 weeks it had sat in the notebook like a door she had decided to leave closed. It was 3 in the morning when Mrs. Rose needed it. Evelyn had woken in pain. The kind that was not ordinary and did not slow. Mrs. Rose called the ambulance first, and while she waited, she looked at that number and understood that whatever Evelyn had decided, this was not a moment for decisions. This was a moment for anyone who should be there to be there. She called the number. It rang 4 times. A man's voice, hoarse with sleep. "Who is this?" Mrs. Rose said, "My name is Margaret Rose, and I don't have time to explain everything. I'm calling about Evelyn Carter. She is being taken to St. Miriam's Hospital by ambulance. She is pregnant with your child, and she needs you there." A pause. "How do you know it's mine?" he asked. "Because she wrote your number down," Mrs. Rose said, and then spent 6 weeks not calling it. Adrien was dressed in 4 minutes. He would not be able to explain later why he moved so fast. There was no decision that he could point to, no moment of sitting and weighing and concluding. His body simply moved with the particular urgency of something that has been waiting a long time to know what it believes. He told himself this was about the child, about legal responsibility, about information that required action. He was in the car before any of those explanations fully formed. The investor meeting was at 7 that morning. 11 people flying in from 3 countries. A deal 18 months in the making. His chief of staff would be waiting with briefing materials and a pressed agenda. Adrien called him at 4 a.m. and told him to postpone it. The whole meeting, his chief of staff said. All of it. "Adrien, these people are all ready. Handle it." He ended the call. He drove through streets that were still mostly dark. The city at this hour belonged to delivery drivers and hospital workers and people for whom the night had not been optional. He thought about Evelyn and that small notebook on a nightstand he had never seen. He thought about the nurse's words. She didn't want her child growing up as a footnote in someone else's story. He pressed the accelerator. For the first time in years, his empire felt like a thing he had left on a shelf somewhere. St. Miriam's Hospital was pale and fluorescent in the way hospitals are at 4 in the morning, every surface too bright, every sound carrying too far, time moving in the strange uneven way it does in rooms that see too much of life and death. Adrien found the right ward in 6 minutes. He had learned long ago that moving with certainty in an unfamiliar place was mostly about behaving as though you belonged. He saw her through the small window in the door. She was on the bed, pale in a way he had never seen her, not the composed paleness of a professional keeping her face still, but the actual, unguarded color of a person whose body is using everything it has. There were monitors. In 4-line. A nurse adjusting something near the bed. He stood in the corridor. A doctor came through the door and nearly walked into him. "Are you family?" the doctor asked. Quick, practical, already moving. Adrien opened his mouth. The correct answer, the true answer at that moment in every legal and official sense, was no. He looked through the window. "I'm the father," he said. The doctor nodded and kept walking. Simple. No drama. As though people arrived in hospital corridors and claimed parenthood at 4 in the morning every day. Maybe they did. Adrien stood where he was and felt the weight of those 3 words. He had not planned to say them. But he found, once they were out, that he did not want to take them back. The baby was born early morning. A girl. Small, loud, briefly purple, and then pink. The particular pink of someone who has just decided to be alive and has opinions about it already. Adrien was not in the room when it happened. He sat in the corridor on a chair that was designed for waiting and did exactly that. He waited. A nurse came out and told him. He nodded and asked if they were both okay. The nurse said Evelyn was resting and the baby was being monitored but was healthy and strong. "Would you like to see her?" the nurse asked. He followed her to a small room with a bassinet under a warm light. He stood over it and looked at his daughter for a long time. She was asleep. Her face was new and unfamiliar in the way that only newborn faces are, not yet arranged into any expression the world has taught them, still carrying the absolute neutrality of someone who has not yet begun. But her left hand, curled at the edge of the blanket, showed it clearly. A small mark. Slightly irregular. Positioned on the inside of the wrist. Adrien knew that mark. He had it himself. His father had it. His grandfather, in photographs. It ran in the Blackwood family like a signature. A small piece of evidence written in the oldest language. He stood there for a very long time. Evelyn woke to light and the quiet sound of monitoring equipment. She turned her head. He was in the chair beside the bed. Not standing, sitting, leaning slightly forward, his elbows on his knees. He was still in the clothes he had clearly driven in, no tie, his face carrying the particular geography of a night spent awake. He looked up when she moved. For a moment neither of them spoke. "She's healthy," he said. The nurse said she's eating well. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, he was still there. "How did you?" she started. "An elderly woman named Mrs. Rose called my number at 4 in the morning." He paused. "She said you had it written down but hadn't used it." Evelyn said nothing. "I should have," he began. "Don't." Her voice was quiet but exact. "Whatever you're about to say, make sure it's true. Not what you think I need to hear. Not what sounds correct in a hospital room. The actual truth." He was quiet for a moment. "I made a decision without thinking clearly," he said. "I believed what I was shown because it was easier than asking harder questions. And I am sorry for what that cost you." She looked at the ceiling. "Regret is not the same as love," she said. "I know," he said. "I need you to understand that before anything else happens." He asked for the DNA test on a Tuesday. Evelyn had been home from the hospital for 5 days, home meaning Mrs. Rose's spare room, which was small and warm and had a yellow curtain over the window that the morning light came through in a way that felt kind. Adrien came in person. He sat in the chair Mrs. Rose offered him and held the tea he was given without drinking it. "I'm not asking because I doubt you," he said. "I want to be clear about that." Evelyn looked at him from across the small table. "Then why?" "Because I want legal standing to protect her. Not just morally, legally. Her name. Her rights. Her claim on everything that's mine by blood. He paused. I should have been the person you called. I know I wasn't that person yet. The test is how I start building something you can trust. Evelyn was quiet for a while. You have a birthmark, she said finally. He looked up. Inside the left wrist. She has it too. Something moved through his face. Not surprise, he had already seen it. Something else. The expression of a man receiving confirmation he had already half accepted. Fatherhood is not won by blood alone, she said. I know that. Say it like you mean it. He set the teacup down. I know that, Evelyn. She nodded slowly. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. Soren called on a Thursday afternoon. Adrien was at his desk, actually working for the first time in 2 weeks, moving through contracts with the mechanical focus of a man trying to rebuild routine. He picked up on the first ring. I have something, Soren said. What he had was this, a record of an access card used on the night of the leak. The card belonged to a junior executive assistant named Davis, who worked 2 floors below Evelyn and had no reason to access those files. The timestamps matched. The access points matched. But Davis had not been in the building that night either. His card had been used. He had not used it. Soren had spoken to Davis quietly, off the record, in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building. Davis had been careful and frightened and had asked twice whether he would be protected before he said anything. What he said was this: Vanessa Hale had asked him, 6 weeks before the leak, to test his access card on a specific server. She told him it was a security audit. She said it was authorized. He had believed her because she was engaged to the owner and people in that position do not usually need to lie. She had recorded the access credentials. She had used them herself. Adrien read Soren's written summary 3 times. Then he called his lawyer. Then he called the board. The emergency board meeting was called for a Monday morning. Vanessa received her invitation the way she received most things, with composure and the particular alertness of someone who reads everything carefully for what it is not saying. The invitation said, Review of security protocol and internal findings. Attendance required. Her name was on it. So was the name of 4 senior board members. So was the name of a corporate lawyer she recognized. So was the name Evelyn Carter. That last name was the thing she read twice. Then again. Her face remained still. She told herself there were explanations. Evelyn was there as a reference point. As a formality. As a resolved matter being closed on paper. She told herself Adrien was not the kind of man who made scenes. She had built 8 months of certainty on the fact that Adrien controlled situations rather than exposing them. She chose a gray suit. Her best earrings. The presentation of a woman who has nothing to account for. The boardroom was full when she arrived. Evelyn sat near the far end of the table, quiet, straight-backed, with the same expression she had worn the day she was escorted out. Not angry. Not afraid. Waiting. Vanessa sat at her usual chair. Adrien walked in and did not look at her. That was the first signal. 8 months of reading him, and she knew it immediately. She folded her hands on the table and kept her face perfectly still. Adrien did not make a speech. That was not his style and had never been. He sat at the head of the table and he presented the information the way he presented all information, clearly, in sequence, without theater. First, the security footage. The camera outside the server room at 11:38 p.m. A figure in a dark coat. A pause. A hand raising a keycard. The coat had a distinctive button on the left collar. Vanessa wore it often. It was sitting in her wardrobe 14 floors above. Then the access records. Davis's card. The timestamps. Davis's written statement, read aloud by Adrien's lawyer without inflection. Then the emails. Recovered from a deleted archive by Soren's technical contact. Messages between Vanessa and a competitor's middle executive, drafted in careful language that almost but did not quite conceal what was being arranged. The room was completely silent. Vanessa's face held through the footage. It held through the statement. It held through the emails. It changed when Adrien turned to the board and said, the woman at this table who was dismissed for this leak was not responsible for it. Her name, her record, and her reputation are to be fully restored. Effective today. He did not look at Vanessa when he said it. He looked at Evelyn. The same boardroom. The same table. The same 14 people. This time, every single one of them was looking at her. Vanessa spoke when the footage ended. She was composed. The composure of someone who has prepared for multiple versions of a conversation and has selected the correct one. This is a fabrication, she said. A retaliation. Adrien, whatever that woman has told you. She told me nothing, Adrien said. I found this myself. A pause. We should speak privately, Vanessa said. There are things the board doesn't need to. There's one more thing, Adrien said. He opened a folder. She saw it before he spoke. She knew what it was by the header at the top of the page. You told me, in March, that you were pregnant, Adrien said. I believed you because I had no reason not to. I now have a paternity test result ordered through my legal team. He set the paper down. The child is not mine. The room received this in complete silence. Vanessa looked at the paper on the table. She had built a great deal on that particular piece of information. The pregnancy had been the insurance, the final layer, the thing that would hold Adrien in place even if the rest shifted. She looked at the board members. At the lawyer. At Evelyn at the far end of the table. The meeting is adjourned, Adrien said. My legal team will be in contact with yours. He gathered his papers. He did not look at her again. They were alone in the corridor afterward. Adrien had asked the others to give him a moment. Evelyn stood near the window with the city behind her. He stood a few feet away. Come home, he said. She looked at him. I have an apartment, he said. A floor that's been empty for 2 years because I haven't known what to do with it. It's yours, the babies. Both of you. I'll handle everything. I know you will, she said. That's not the problem. Then what is? She was quiet for a moment. I've watched you manage things for 2 years. Problems. Situations. Acquisitions. She looked at him steadily. I am not a thing that needs managing, Adrien. And neither is she. He said nothing. You showed up at the hospital, she said. That mattered. Today mattered. But showing up in a crisis is not the same as being present every day. And every day is what a child needs. Then tell me what you need. Time, she said. Respect. For you to understand that you don't get to decide the terms of this because you have more money than I do. She picked up her coat from the chair beside her. Earn it. The way people who don't have towers named after them earn things. Slowly. She walked toward the elevator. I'm not disappearing, she said without turning. I'm just not rushing. 6 months later, Adrien Blackwood did something he had never done in his professional life. He stepped back. Not from the company, he still ran it, still sat at the head of that table. But from the version of power that had organized his entire existence, the absolute control, the managed silence, the careful distance he had kept between himself and every person who might matter. He founded a small organization. No announcement, no press release. His communications team had to push hard even for the single paragraph that eventually appeared in a business journal. The organization provided legal support and emergency resources for women in employment disputes. It carried no name that connected it to him publicly. Internally, it was registered under one name. Evelyn knew. He had told her himself, sitting in Mrs. Rose's kitchen on a Sunday morning while the baby slept in the next room, because he did not want her to find out another way. She had looked at him for a long time. Then she had refilled his tea without saying anything. That was how it went those months. Slowly. A Sunday here. A Thursday evening there. Not managed. Not arranged. Just present. The baby's name was Nora. She had the birthmark on her wrist and her mother's particular habit of watching everything carefully before she moved. Adrien stood at the window of Mrs. Rose's apartment one evening while Nora slept against his chest, and the city did what cities do, going on, indifferent, enormous, and he thought about the word he had spent his life confusing with strength. Control. He had been wrong about what it protected. He had almost lost the only empire that would ever matter. He pulled his daughter a little closer. He had been given another chance at knowing what he now held. He did not intend to waste it.